Cahirlig, I propose to share my time with the Deputy Gilmore and raised of 6 minutes to 9 minutes, 15 minutes. I'd like to begin with the Minister of State's assertion that he recognises that we're talking about a basic human right. And in the few minutes that I have available to me, I'd like to just lay out a few fundamentals. If you recognise that what my colleague Deputy Haldane, and I congratulate him on it, has proposed in the name of the Labour Party for the second time, he is dealing with a matter of right. A right delayed is a right denied. That is a fundamental. We are not talking about a concession. And we are not talking about a concession that is adjusted to the social prejudice of the day. I've been through all of that, all of the different referendums, and as I pass along, I'd like to make a few points clearly. I saw the number of people who were wounded when we had a debate about the right to civil divorce, and we had to go through the entire exercise again. At that stage, my colleague, Deputy Marvin Taylor, was a minister. We were members of the Cabinet in 1993. And yes, there have been many references to courageous decisions that had to be taken, including the decriminalisation legislation associated with former Deputy Maura Geoghegan-Quinn. I supported her in that. And let me put it on the record as well, I recall her thanking me publicly in Galway for supporting her as a Labour member of the Cabinet with her when her own colleagues were undermining her in the constituency and elsewhere. But the truth of it was, when we negotiated our participation in government on every occasion, the Fianna Fáil government was forced to accept reforming legislation in divorce. It was forced to accept reforming legislation in relation to family planning. And it is being forced yet again to recognise that we're speaking about a human right. That is a first point. A second fact is, you do not have legislation proposed. What you have in your government programme is a scheme for legislation. Again, as a former member of Cabinet, I can say, a scheme for legislation is not legislation. And the heads of legislation are very far from the text of legislation. And it is clear that many of your colleagues intend to introduce such extraneous matters as to completely obfuscate the issue. The reality of it is, we are talking about a rights issue. And we're talking about a citizenship issue. And we're talking about people who are citizens in the institution that includes a sexual relationship. And let us recognise that such a thing exists, that they have the same right to participate personally and institutionally in the life of the state as equal citizens with protection and responsibilities before the law. That is what is at stake. Now, if you intended to add all of the other different forms of people who find themselves living together, Deputy Mansart is worried about very elderly people who are managed to be brothers and sisters and so on. Of course we have compassion for that. But if you were to take Deputy Mansard's rubbish, you would take, for example, all of the members of a monastery and divide them into couples and say for the purposes of doing the adjustment in law, you are now going to have to deal with that as well. It is not only a distracting nonsense, it is a dangerous nonsense because he hasn't the guts to face up to what is a rights issue. And it makes a mockery of his much vaunted support for republicanism in the general sense. No Republican can vote against legislation like this. And if you wanted to extend it to include all of the taxation benefits, all of the other legal adjustments and whatever, you could accept this bill and you could tag them on, because then you would be doing the task of administration. But we're in a difficult position in our Parliament at any event. I say this as somebody who's been here more than 20 years and 9 years in the Senate. The executive has exclusive monopoly over the right to introduce legislation in practical terms. You've just heard speeches that gave instances of the very few occasions in which government accepted legislation that came from this side of the House. But if you claim a monopoly on the right to introduce legislation, why then not take this legislation and use it as a framework and make it perfect if you wish? If you want to be Republican, as you put it, why not go on then and recognise, if you like, civil marriage as well? If you say that marriage is challenged as in fact Deputy Linehan did in a totally confusing speech. Deputy Linehan quoted, for example, the article of the Constitution that is relevant, Article 41. The state pledges itself to guard with special care the institution of marriage on which the family is founded and to protect it against attack.
Well, I can tell you, sir, and tell the Fianna Fáil party and in its different governments and the PDs, they have done more to undermine marriage because of their contract with speculation in this country than anybody proposing legislation on this side of the House. Was it strengthening and protecting marriage when people were compulsorily forced into mortgage slavery in the market, or when people can no longer afford a house, or where people are committed to commuting such long distances that they can no longer spend some time with their family? So let's cut the nonsense about all of this. This exclusive reliance on the market undermined marriage and the family so systematically and so uncritically that it comes hollow for us to be taking lectures from Deputy Linehan.
The subject.
Please, there are 6 minutes remaining in the slot.
I beg your pardon?
6 minutes remaining in the debate.
Yes, I want to conclude then by simply saying this then. It is an issue of rights and equal citizenship. I think that the invocation of a threat of civil union through marriage is a distortion and a camouflage. I believe that the bill is constitutional. I support it. I pay tribute to Deputy Howland for bringing it forward again. And I call even at this late stage for those who can vote to vote for it, because it is not. It is a modest reforming equality measure, nothing less.
Thank you. Deputy Gilmore.